Well, welcome back to the Pastors Podcast. Pastor Scott here with Pastors Brian and Matt.
Hello.
Hey.
It has been a minute, guys.
Quite a while.
It's been some time.
I didn't look back on the podcast schedule, but I mean, it was at least before the summer since the three of us have been on the Pastors Podcast together.
It's been a while. Yeah, we've been recording cohort recordings.
So we have been sitting here recording things a lot,
but we haven't been on the Pastors Podcasts.
That's right.
The what do you call it? The
most popular podcast
most
between
popular,
Idaho and Barrington.
Yes.
Or whatever, yeah.
The number one podcast between Idaho and Iowa on Barrington
Which we're still
Avenue.
not sure is actually true.
Yeah, I mean,
but
there's a big building across the street with probably people doing podcasts over there.
There might be somebody in our basement recording something that's more popular than this.
There were some guys. There were
We just don't even know about
four
it.
guys at church yesterday, and they're from like the mountains, Big Bear area, and they're just YouTubers, and they just came to church because they were in the West LA doing their YouTube videos. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. What kind of YouTube videos do you do?
That's a
And
dangerous question.
They couldn't really describe them, so I was like,
What?
all right. I was
Did
like,
they
is it
try?
pranks? Kind of, but like they were using very esoteric words. I was like, oh, I'll say you guys are filmmakers. They're like, yeah, we're filmmakers. All kinds. Our church brings all kinds. So anyways, all that to say, it's really great to be back with you guys.
It's great to be. I mean, this is like the only time we talk, so that's good.
Yes, this is the only time. We share an office. This is the only time we get to catch up. How are you, Brian?
I'm good, Matt. This is what it's like in the office. You know, awkward silences and
Just staring into each
perfunctory
other's
answers.
eyes. Yeah. It's exciting though. This is the
Lots of small talk.
This is the flagship podcast of Cornerstone West LA. So we're excited about everything that we're doing here.
Hey, I'm feeling a little bit reminiscent, because it's been over 5 years now that we've been doing this Pastors Podcast.
I looked back. Do you know when the first one we did was?
I do, because it was February 2020.
February 2020.
It was.
Isn't that funny?
It was this providential. I mean, the reason I remember that is because it felt like this providential thing that the Lord that we had started this up, and it kind of became a lifeline, a communication tool during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But because you would think that we started up for the pandemic, but we'd actually started it the month beforehand.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I looked back and I was like, oh wow, we did one or a few in February.
We did like.
What were we talking about?
You know what? We were talking about our core values, which
Yeah.
we're going to be getting into a little bit today. So speaking of looking back and nostalgic, today in the episode, we're going to be talking about being a church for the city, like what it looks like and what it means, and really why God has called us to be a church for this city at this time. And I thought one way to enter that in, instead of thinking about it simply in light of what God is doing right here, right now, is to take a bit of a nostalgic step back, because 20 years ago was when we all connected and started doing ministry together. In 2005, we planted Shoreline together. Matt was a part of that, and was a freshman at UCLA at the time.
Correct.
And
For all of you college students out there listening, 20 years from now, you could be sitting in my chair.
and we'll all be listening to you. So 20 years ago, I think one way to think about how we were all called to be a church for the city is to reflect on what drew us to ministry in West LA in the first place. Like, why a church, and why here?
Huh. Well, it's funny. So, I mean, you kind of got to know some of the story, I guess, to understand that. Like, I graduated from UCLA and went to seminary and met Scott almost immediately. I was living in West LA at the time. And as Scott and I got to know each other, we talked about potentially planting a church. And living in West LA, for me, the reason, why be a church for the city, was because I was a Christian here. And this was a time, it's funny, it's kind of hard, I think, for people now to think of this way, but this was a time when there weren't many churches here. I mean, like there were some. First Baptist was here. And I think Pacific Crossroads had started like a year before or something.
It was brand new.
And there was no Collective, there was no Commons, there was no Reality LA at that point, I don't think. I think Tim came in a year or two after.
Risen was
Westside
Christian Fellowship.
That's right.
There's no Vintage.
Yeah. So like the amount of churches here that had some kind of presence when the internet was like not brand new, but like not what it is now. It was like before the first iPhone, I think.
It was.
I remember when we saw the first iPhone, one of the people in the church had gotten the first iPhone in the first week, and we were at your apartment on Berkeley Ave
right, yeah,
in Santa Monica looking at it.
How does this work?
I remember how amazed you were at the touch screen.
Gorillas,
You're no
touching
way.
this thing. But yeah, so it wasn't like you had instant access to where everything was at all times. And so you couldn't like necessarily Google where all the churches were. Anyway, the point is, even if there were a lot of churches here that we didn't know about, they were not really accessible to us. And so there were less, and the ones that were here weren't necessarily those that anyone knew about or had a lot of word of mouth. And so living here, I loved this place, and I loved the people in it, and I loved the culture of it. There's so many things where it felt like home to me. And to know that I felt like I kind of had to leave the city to go to a vibrant church. That's probably an exaggeration. I'm sure there are vibrant churches here, but like the feeling of that as a young person really drew me to want to say, well, why can't we have a vibrant church here? And then thinking of the numbers and realizing how many people were. You don't need one vibrant church. You need, 50 or 100 or 150.
Yeah, I think maybe that's part of the thing that stands out is the per capita. Like you can name some, and there was like their Vineyard was around.
Vineyard was
there's
here. Brad
churches
was
that
here.
are around.
Yeah.
But the per capita, you're talking a lot of the neighborhoods in West LA, you got 25, 30,000 people per square mile, and no churches, no gospel preaching churches, maybe some old mainline denomination churches here and there, some small buildings and tucked away in these different corners. But per capita, you go to even different parts of LA. You go to the Valley, you go to South LA, you go to different parts of our city, and there's a good amount of churches per capita in a lot of these places. Not all of them are big. Not all of them are, there's a whole range of churches. But I think maybe the thing that stands out, especially in West LA, is the amount of the scarcity of churches per capita. They're there, but per capita, there's so few.
Yeah, there were a ton, I think, of like churches in one sense. But yeah, the idea that people needed churches to go to find out about Christ was a big part of it. Like you think about a new church, and one of the main things that's different about a new church is it doesn't really have any background or history that would incentivize it to serve the people who were already there. Like it's brand new. And so you only start a church if you want to see people who don't know church and don't know Jesus to get to know him. And that was the main motivator for us. There were certain Christians where it's like, oh, it'd be so cool if we had a church here in our city. But that was a pretty secondary motivation. It really was, how are these people ever going to know if there's not a vibrant church, near them?
Yeah, that's one of the things that stands out to me when I think about the church scene in West LA now and 20 years ago. At that time, it was a lot of those guys, faithful guys, like faithful churches. A lot of those guys, though, were a generation older than us.
Yeah,
and they had all come out of the Jesus movement, right? Or like kind of the way they'd ridden the wave of the Jesus movement before us, and that was still kind of the ethos there. But for our generation and younger, there was less, and it didn't, not just in who was being reached, but like there just wasn't a lot of interest. And so it was even some of the interesting questions that are now, like there just wasn't a lot of interest from people our generation. And so the question was, how do we start conversations? How do we meet people where they're at in order to engage on the gospel? And during that time, one of those guys, I think it was Lyle. Do you remember Lyle?
Yeah, man.
Randall's.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just a faithful kind of a collaborator between churches. But he talked to me about pastors who were in West LA to pastor a church, and those that were in West LA for the sake of West LA. And you were either there for a church or you were there for the city. And there's a little bit of like a false dichotomy there. Like it's not necessarily either or, but a lot of times, a lot of the churches in West LA had become kind of career spots. Like they're a spot where you came and you pastored a church to care for those people because the church was an outpost, right? It's an outpost in a dark area. It's a place where Christians can come and be fed and be protected and be safe. And so churches sometimes are viewed as like an outpost, and increasingly there were a lot, or churches are viewed as like missional hubs, right? Where they're stationed there. It's a hub stationed on the front lines of a mission field, kind of for the sake of the lost. And I actually think both are really important, right? Like you need to, a church needs to be a place for Christians, and it needs to be an outpost, and it also needs to be a missional hub, one that's stationed on the front lines of a mission field for the sake of the lost. And I'm curious, I mean, reflecting on both the history of our church and on just who and where we are now, why you guys think both of those aspects of the local church are important?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say, and you said it, is West LA is a hard place in a lot of ways to be a Christian. There's a lot of hostility towards Christianity, towards institutional religion, maybe not towards spirituality in general, but towards institutional religion. And so I think, and especially in Christianity in particular, I think in people's workplaces, or people who are moving to West LA, or people who are in their neighborhoods, in their communities, to say you're a Christian is it feels shocking and jarring. Like it's a lot, you go to somewhere else, you go to Santa Clarita, you go to, Nashville, you go to wherever, like a lot of other places in our country, in our city, and even in our city, or even in our part of the world, and even in the West, on the West Coast, you have places where it's not unusual to be a Christian, but in West LA, you're an outlier. You're a minority, a vast minority. And so especially when Christians move here, or people who are Christian who are here, there's a hostility in the world around you that makes the safety and outpost security of a church community a really good thing. You need a place that you can be safe and encouraged and loved and cared for, where you're not going to be constantly challenged with everything that you are in your workplace, like you are in your workplace or in your other communities, where the city just is uncomfortable in a lot of ways. You have a small apartment, there's tons of traffic. It's, every store is really small. Like everything is hard. Everything is just harder. And so it's really difficult to be here. And so you need that place where you can be built up and encouraged. But God wants more. He wants more. He doesn't want us just to survive in West LA. Like he doesn't want our faith just to be nurtured. He wants it to be multiplied. And that's part of why we're here. We're here as, we've got this old building, our church that we're now, part of, not the same one that was 20 years ago, but this institutional church has been here for 120 plus years. So there's a tendency you could easily fall back into, just take care of the people who are here. But there's something more that God has called us to, on top of being an incubator, a place of safety for those who are believers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's such a key and important vision to being a part of that, to providing that community, being that place, being that family, particularly when so many people are maybe far from family. Brian, why not just be that?
Yeah, on the one hand, I do think there's a way we should recognize that life in the city, like Matt said, is difficult. It's uniquely difficult in certain ways if you're a Christian, especially sort of a committed Christian, and not just sort of someone who's maybe attends church, here and there, has a background in it. And so you want to be able to say, yeah, like there's a refuge here at the church. And simultaneously, there's a challenge to not let it just be a refuge. I think that's a valid way to think about it. And it's important. For me, I always go back to the idea that you're never really going to experience the refuge if you're not inviting other people into it. In other words, these don't have to combat each other. Yeah. And that's not what Matt was saying, but just like there's a way that in our heads, that sense that there's a tension between them can get overplayed. And you kind of go, okay, well, now I'm going to take this, this Sunday, I'm going to take just sort of refuge, rest, recharge, just have my needs met in the church. Then next Sunday, I'm going to invite somebody and be all about pouring out. And I just think that mistakes how humans work. and how spiritual health works. Like spiritual health is this weird thing, like refuge, rest, all the grace, all the things that you want to feel in a church community where you are safe. You lose them if you don't share them. And so if you don't invite others in, if you don't have that stream being refreshed with people who are experiencing grace for the first time, anew, you end up not having it as full or as rich of an experience for yourself. There's just something really dynamic about how reaching out, being for the city, for other people, needing them to see what you've seen is a part of you finding the refuge that you're looking for. And if you don't involve that kind of initiative to go be for the city, you lose the very thing you're trying to hold on to in having this place be a refuge.
I love that. And it's, it exposes the false dichotomy, not just as like, oh, no. It actually can be both, but it shows how both are inherent to not only the life God's called us to, but they're inherent to one another. This is why, at our family meeting at the beginning of the summer, we talked about just seeing both growth and health in the church. And those two, like you can't, like you say, you can't be healthy without growth, without multiplication. Like the gospel by its very nature grows and multiplies. You also can't, did I say it backwards? Anyways,
I think you got it.
Okay. You also can't be healthy without so you can't be healthy without growth, and you also can't grow without being healthy. Without, like, if you're trying to multiply something, but you don't have spiritual vibrancy in the church itself, in our hearts, then what we're sharing is an empty message, right?
And I think I just want to say, I think it's really important. I think it's really true, the connection between the two. I think in the experience of people in the church, like I remember I was teaching a class on a mission class a few years ago, and someone who had moved from out of the state and moved into West LA. We were talking, and she was saying basically that she had like a huge fear of the city, and basically didn't leave her place, her home, and unless she was coming to church, and that's it. And there's this, I think there's like and that's an extreme version where she's like, I said, have you walked around your neighborhood? Haven't even walked around my neighborhood. Like, I'm so scared of everything out there. Like, I'm just trying to survive. Like, I know there's so much hostility. I know there's so much pressure against Christians out in that world. I can't even, I just need to stay here in my safe zones. For us, I think there's a really important connection between the two. I think in the minds of a lot of people, like coming to the city, or maybe if you're new here, maybe as a Christian, you feel that hostility. I think there's a feeling of withdrawing just for the sake of safety. And I think what we're trying to say is, if you're feeling that same kind of fear of these other things, it's going to prevent you from growing and prevent you from being on mission the way that God wants you to be. And so I think there is something really compelling about this conversation as it comes to people who are new to West LA, people who are new to Cornerstone. If you're listening right now and you're like, I just trying to survive, I'm feeling so much pressure everywhere, we want to invite you into growth and multiplication in both contexts.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the ways we've communicated this over the years is through our core values. And one of our core values is that we're globally and locally invested. As a church.
Because we're not cool enough to say glocal.
Locally.
Years
like, is that
of
cooler?
Saying that. Yeah, I just don't think it's cooler. I don't think saying glocal, you need a requisite level of cool to pull that off.
We could have tried to be cool and said glocal.
See,
I think that would be trying to be not cool. That's my.
I think glocal might just be a magnifier. Like, if we tried to say it, it would make us lamer, right? Like, whatever lameness we have, it'd be like, no, that's just,
you're not wrong. There is like a thought leader out there.
There's a thought leader
out
there who's like super cool, and who can say glocal, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm just not sure we're him.
So the issue is we aren't cool. That's the problem.
Globally and locally minded.
Yeah. Globally and locally invested.
So we're globally and locally invested. We talk about how we're globally invested a lot. Every time we talk with one of our key partners, whether they be global or our local key partners, and so we talk about that dynamic. But I want to talk about what it means to be locally invested. And one of the ways we describe this when we talk about our core values is that we're locally invested in that we have a heart for both the marginalized and the lost. So being locally invested is about sharing the gospel and multiplying and having a heart that's broken for the lost. It's also about having a heart that is broken for the marginalized and seeks to do good in our city for the sake of our city. We're relieving suffering in our city. So how are both of those, both having a heart for the marginalized and a heart for the lost, parts of being a church that is for the city?
You know, when Jesus talks about loving people, loving your neighbor, loving God, one of the places in Luke that he specifies, you know, how do you love a neighbor is the Good Samaritan. And at some level, it's always struck me as kind of artificial to try and divide up the lostness of someone spiritually and the marginalization of someone sort of societally, or to divide up their sin from their suffering in kind of two neat compartments inside of them. And they have to have a certain amount of lostness points, you know, for you to go talk to them about it. It feels artificial. And I think when you're trying to theoretically figure out how you should be and how you should act, that kind of thinking can be appealing because it feels clean. It feels like a way of going, oh, here's how I'll make decisions. They'll have to be this kind of person, and that will, you know, allow me to make these sorts of decisions. But at some level, if you're around people, you just take care of whole people. And that is going to have to involve both of those. And it's not going to involve them in the same way for any individual person. Every person has their own set of sin and suffering and how those swirl together, and how they're going to need to hear the gospel, and how they're going to need to experience the love of Christ in, you know, tangible ways. And whether that's words or, you know, actions or resources or whatever, it's very, very difficult to really split those up in any way that actually makes sense to the way the world actually works. And so to me, it's just very much we just get around people and love them as fully as you can. And both these things are going to end up happening, and you're going to need some wisdom and some help to discern how to do it in specific instances. But overall, boy, how can you ever, you know, divide those up?
Yeah, I hear you saying that this is vocabulary we're giving to the overflow of the call to love your neighbor as yourself. And if we're going to love God and love our neighbor, then what that's going to produce is, as a group of Christians, is a group of people that are here for the city, not just for themselves and not just for each other, for themselves and for each other, but also here for the city.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Brian, because people are whole people, and maybe particularly in Los Angeles, there are people who are hurting spiritually and people who are hurting physically, and those needs and those hurts intertwine in a lot of different ways. And so if we're going to represent Christ well, if we're going to love as he's called us to love, I mean, I think about, you know, Matthew 25 and, you know, the final judgment, and Jesus sort of basically saying, like, did you feed those who are hungry and give drink to those who are thirsty? Like, did you love those who, like, have you loved in the way that I've called you and shown you how to love? Or I think about Jeremiah 29. Think about God's people in exile, right? In a place that is hostile to them, right? And saying, seek the welfare of the city. Like, seek what's best for this city. Seek what it's good. Seek out what is beneficial to the city. Help those who are in need. Serve the city in those ways. I think that's just part of what it means to represent Christ well. It's a combination of both of those things together, and I think they fuel each other in a lot of ways. The danger, I guess, would be some places or some churches emphasize only sharing the gospel and never like helping practical needs or loving people with practical needs. And some churches emphasize, again, these are caricatures, but some churches emphasize only practical needs and, you know, hesitate on the gospel sharing side of things. But if we view people as whole people and we view their needs and hurts as whole needs and whole hurts, we're going to want to love and share the gospel and the hope of salvation, the spiritual hope that God offers through Christ, as well as love and care for people in practical and practical ways that their needs demand.
I appreciate that. I think that's one of the ways this vocabulary, in a sense, doesn't kind of define specifically what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do, but it tries to simply summarize the fully orbed encapsulation of the nature of being a Christian, and of the nature of the church. I mean, to be a Christian is not just to love God, but to love God and to love neighbor. And I feel like what we're saying is that to be a church is to be a church for one another and for the city. Like, by its very nature, a church exists for one another and for the city. And when it exists for the city, it exists for all the city, to be light into spiritual and physical darkness wherever you are. And you know what? We'd probably be having a different conversation if we were a church in a rural town. We wouldn't be talking about being a church for the city, not because they have a different principles, but because the application of these same principles, for us, they take root and manifestation in this city in particular. So we kind of look back at remembering what, in a sense, brought us here and how historically these same principles have driven us to be the church that God's made here. I'm curious from your guys' perspectives, in what ways do you think Cornerstone, as it is today, is uniquely shaped for West LA in this generation? Like what are some examples that we can point so that this isn't just ethereal? So people are like, this is how God has shaped Cornerstone, and what we are trying to, how we're trying to live this out as we reach and love and care for this city in this moment.
I think one of the ways we're shaped for this comes by virtue of the city itself. I think the city has shaped us. You know, when you've been here, Scott, Matt, and I for 20 years, there's ways that you live in a kind of almost a symbiotic relationship with the city around you in ministry. I talk to other pastors and they are talking about, these people that they've known for 40 years. They've been in the church for, they're 60 years old. They've been there since they were 18 or something. And we don't have very many of those, but they don't have very many people who are like brand new. And part of that is because of where we live. And I think that has primed us in certain ways to learn how to meet new people and the people who are in this city the way where they are. And so there's ways. It's hard to figure out like a tangible way that has like shaped us.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking like our the shape of our discipleship communities, the shape of our equipping, even the way in which we go about our preaching are all like, they would probably be different in different places.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So the preaching, that's a decent example. Like I met a guy who was saying they just did like 2 years in Deuteronomy. And I was like, that sounds really cool. Like we could never do that. I mean, we could. We're doing a bunch of years in Luke, but because of the transiency of the city, there's a lot of people at Cornerstone who will only be here. What's the average? I want to say the average of people being here is like 5 years. And that's with a lot of some outliers are like 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, but a lot of them are one. They're a graduate program, right? Or whatever. They're here for a short season. And so to give someone the whole counsel of God when they're only here for typically a handful of years, but also be looking to increase the biblical knowledge and growth of people who are going to be here for 20 or 30 or 40, that shapes the decisions you make and how long you spend in a certain series or what you do in between or how you insert, different smaller series inside of the longer ones like we're doing in Luke right now. There are a lot of ways that I think the question is more like, how are we missional? And I think in that sense, like, yeah, almost everything we do is in some way shaped by how do we look towards those who are new to Christianity? How do we look towards those who are in the city who need something, who might not be in the city very long, by the way. They might only be here for a moment. What can we give them that will help them get a sense of who Jesus is, draw them in towards, if God gives them faith, cultivate that in the ways that we can before most of them will be sent off, but some will stay and put down roots and then become those who reach out to others. How do we do that? And I think our preaching is a good example of that. There's always a cognizance that there's people in the room who do not have a really good sense of what Christianity is about. There's always a good sense that the series that we're picking has something for them and not just something for maybe career Christians, those who've been in church a long time. And I think you could say the same thing for our equipping. I mean, Matt, you could speak more to our discipleship communities and how it works there. But I think it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, I think there are certain places maybe where you grow and attract people by doing events or by having sort of like big things going on, right? Where that people are just automatically drawn. I think there are so many barriers that people have to the church, that to the idea of church in our city in West LA, that the best resource we have available to us to reach the city is the people we have. It's the people. So at the end of the day, our job as pastors is to shepherd, love, invest in, equip the people here at Cornerstone to, in their spheres of influence, represent Christ well, invite people to know Christ, be a light in the midst of darkness, do things that that really we can't do. Like you can't just host like a revival every Friday, right? Like or whatever, right? Like, and these are different kind of programmatic things that maybe make sense in other contexts. And I'm not even like saying it's bad or whatever it is, but I guess what I'm saying is there's like not even like for most people in our city, there's not even like a Christian consciousness at all, really. Like a lot of the evangelism in our city is long. It takes a long time, a lot of conversation, a lot of relational connection, a lot of different conversations, sometimes over weeks and months and years of conversations. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is invest in people and invite people into spaces where they can explore and learn more about who Christ is and what he's done, open up opportunities to train and equip the people who are part of the church to be better equipped and confident as they go into their spheres of influence, and then pray and ask God to do the work that only he can do. There's a lot of hard soil out there and a lot of complicated situations and hearts and people who, I don't know, I've probably had dozens of different interactions and conversations with people of like long evangelism relationships that have ended up going nowhere because you get to a point where you're like, hey, like this invitation is for you. Do you want to like follow Christ and you want to like take this step forward? And people are like, I don't know. And there's just like a lot of like stuff like that happens in our city that is hard, that might be different in different contexts. So I guess the structure of our small groups, they're small, they're not overwhelmingly big, they're localized as much as possible. There's ways that we are just investing in training our people to do the things that only really they can do in their spheres of influence, and then pray and ask God to do the work that only he can do.
You know, it makes, I feel like it's such an encouragement to people it provides an encouragement to get equipped and to participate. Like the whole reason we do equipping the way we do it is for that reason. And it's not simply to deliver some information that you don't have or that maybe you've never heard before. For some of you it is, but for others, it's to take that information and sit in a cohort, in a context where you're wrestling through it in this moment, in this place with people. Like when you take a mission cohort or making disciples or something, you're talking about how to apply these biblical principles here and now. And not only is that new when people are regularly new, you may have done that somewhere else, but the question is, what does that look like here? But here's also constantly changing. Like this is it's a different city than it was, even spiritually speaking, in a lot of ways, than it was 20 years ago when we planted. It's a different city than it was 10 years ago. And it's definitely a different city than it was 5 years ago in the midst of COVID. And so this also this is also why we as a church are constantly growing and changing. We're going, not just because we like change, although I do like change, but we are regularly changing and reevaluating and tweaking, and programs are being started and programs are being ended, and we're not just to change things, but because the city's changing. And if we're a church that's here for the city, we're not just going to do things because we've always done them. We're going to do things because they connect in unique ways with the people in our city in this moment. And it's also a really diverse city. So there's lots of different answers to that, and we can't do all of it. But that's what we're striving for, and I think what we're all about together. As we think about change, as we think about, maybe we'll just end here. Brian, we're talking about change. We're talking about making space. We're talking about being here. I know we mentioned at the family meeting that one of those pieces of change is that we're going to be adding a third service in October. So I would like for you to I've loved hearing you describe what won you over to the fact that actually this is what we need to do. Because, and maybe even around the table, you were probably the most reticent to the idea. And I think that it's instructive and may tie all this together for us.
Yeah, I was reticent. I think the reason for that reticence, part of that has to do with just the way we set up the church a little bit, and my areas of oversight and the different kind of staff people that I tend to work closely with, and the cost logistically of this, and knowing that it's going to require not just like a little change, but a lot of disruption to make something like this work. And so for me, it's very much front of mind to see the amount of work this puts on my plate, your guys' plate, the plate of our staff, and plenty of volunteers. And the idea that the band has to wake up like a lot earlier, like things that seem small on paper, but these are people who already sacrifice a ton, for the sake of the church family. So I definitely wasn't unexcited at some level, like about the idea of it, but it was sort of like, whoa, that's a lot of. The excitement can get drained out of you pretty quick when what you see is kind of a mountain of work in front of you and other people, based on a decision that we made. And yet, I do think back to when we started a church, and the reason that church started, causes are funny and they're varied, and there's, providence is a part of it and all these things. But the very personal reason, I think for us, and I know for me, that we started a church is because I was looking around at neighbors and people I'm sharing the street with, and living a life where, despite my own doubts and struggles and difficulties, I had a kind of hope and even joy that came from Jesus Christ and what he has done and is doing in my life, that created a stability and a security and a hope for the future that I just didn't know how I would live without. And thinking that there were other people sharing my apartment building, sharing my streets, often living lives far more difficult than mine, who did not have that because there was no one around telling them it was available to them. That felt like a tragedy. And when I think back to that and know that that's still the same, like per capita, there's still, people moving in here all the time. It's still a tragedy that someone would drive down these streets and not know that's available to them. The idea that we could add a service and get through some logistical hurdles and take on extra work and disrupt our schedules. And, for people with little kids, maybe like having to figure out nap times again or something about what service you're going to attend, all these little things that can feel so heavy. The idea that we could be a part of alleviating a tragedy in someone else's life, that's worth this and a lot more. And I think I said it at the family meeting, but like the idea that in 6 months or a year, someone's giving a testimony in the baptismal because we made room for them the way that other people made room for us and gave us the chance to have that joy despite our doubts and struggles and difficulties. I know that when we see that and hear that and watch them go in the water and come back up, none of us are going to be thinking, yeah, but it was a lot of work. We're just going to be excited and joyful, and it's going to be great. And so for me, that has won the day, and I'm nothing but excited now to take on whatever comes to make room for people so that they can have what we have.
I mean, at the end of the day, what you're saying, I think what's really helpful about this perspective is that souls matter, people matter, and there's a lot of people who don't know Jesus, and we want to do anything and everything we can to invite them to know him.
Well, I think that's what it means to be a church for the city. So thank you guys. Thanks for the time. Thanks today. Thanks for the partnership over all these years. It has been such a joy and what an incredible privilege to keep being able to do it. And not for our sakes, but for the church, the good of the church and the glory of God in that, and for the good of our city and the spread of the gospel there. So thanks for being a part of this. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this with us. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.